Hey guys, Chris here, coming to you with the first video in a series of educational content that we're going to put out to help you guys better understand some of the science and the reasoning behind both nutrition and training principles that we program for you guys. Now today's topic is we're going to take a dive into deloads. Now this is something that we program for quite a lot of you. For some of you, you don't get a deload, but hopefully from this video you'll understand why you do and maybe why you don't get a deload in your training program. So we're going to start off by discussing what a deload is first, and it should be pretty obvious, but a deload is just a brief period in time in your training, which usually for most people is going to be a 1 week cycle, where you're just getting a reduction in the amount of training volume that you perform. Now there's a couple of different ways that we can do deloads. We can either reduce the amount of weight that you're working with, or we can keep the weight the same, but then reduce the amount of sets and reps that you're performing. Either of those will work. It just depends on the period of time that you've been training for, and the mesocycle that you're actually part of your program. So sometimes, like I say, we'll reduce the weight. Other times we'll keep the weight the same, but we'll reduce the amount of sets and reps. So there are a couple of different things that will contribute to what style of deload you will get programmed. Okay. Now the reason for your deload is actually to improve performance. So when you train over a period of time, what happens is your body accumulates fatigue. Okay, and with this fatigue then comes soreness and general just tiredness. Okay, so your performance will eventually start to slow down. Okay, now the reason for a deload, like we say, is it follows this thing which we call the SRA curve. Okay, so if you understand the SRA curve, the deload actually makes quite a lot of sense. Okay, so this is the SRA curve that we've got here, and I'm going to take a bit of a dive in and explain how this all works so that you get a better understanding of the main reason why we're incorporating these deloads into your program. So if we look at the graph here, we've got our X and Y axis, and along each we've got time and performance. So basically what happens is you perform a training session, okay? So let's say we come in and we do a leg day, and your main exercise for that day is a squat, okay? So the squat and the leg session is the training stimulus, okay? So this is our starting point. So let's call it 100 kilos. We come in and we squat 100 kilos, and that is your training stimulus, okay? From that training stimulus comes a period of fatigue, okay? So after you squat and you perform your full 60 or 90 minute leg day, your body goes into a state of fatigue, okay? Now after this fatigue, hopefully we have got good recovery protocols, okay? Now your recovery protocols are things like the amount of protein that you're eating, the amount of general calories that you consume, how much sleep you're getting, how much hydration you have, the amount of stress that you have going on in your lifestyle. All of those things will contribute to recovery. And obviously the better your recovery is, then the better our adaptation is. Okay, so we've got a stimulus, which comes from the leg day, our fatigue, which is followed then by recovery. So after our recovery, then we get what's called adaptation. Okay, now that adaptation is how we get stronger and how we get better. Okay, so if we come in on week 1 and we perform 100 kilo squats, we recover, and then we come back in on week 2, and then we can now perform 105 kilo squats. Okay, same thing will happen again. We go through this whole cycle, and over the space of 4 weeks, ideally then if we recover properly, our performance will end up somewhere up here. Okay, now, how much adaptation that we get will be directly correlated to how good our recovery is. Okay, so this is why we're constantly trying to tell you guys to make sure that your recovery is good. So make sure your calories are adequate, you've got high enough levels of protein, your sleep and your hydration. All of those basic things will contribute to how well you adapt and what kind of results and gains you get from your training. Now, something that happens very common is that we stimulate, okay, we fatigue, but then we don't fully recover, okay? Now, when that happens, instead of our adaptation coming up here to maybe 105 kilos, we will get an average kind of level of recovery and then come back out the same as we did previous, okay? So we are performing 100 kilo squats, we're fatigued, we try to recover and we don't recover fully, and then we train again, okay? Now this can happen over time, and then what happens is your body just gets tired and beat up, and eventually you actually start a downward curve, okay? And at that point, your performance then will start to get worse. So that 100 kilos that felt, moderately hard on week 1, by week 4, your body is so tired, run down and beat up because you're not recovering properly, that 100 kilos actually feels heavier and harder than it did on week 1. So that's why we're constantly banging on about the importance of recovery, okay? Recovery. So in a nutshell, if you've got adequate stimulus and you manage your level of fatigue through better recovery, you will get better adaptation and make better progress and better results, okay? So that in a nutshell is how the SRA curve works, okay? So we want to stimulate with our exercise selection, making sure that we've got the right exercises that provide a good stimulus. We want to make sure that we can recover properly from the session by getting on top of our nutrition, our stress, our sleep, all of the things that we've already talked about. And from that, then we will get an adequate adaptation, and then we will make progress towards our goals, okay? Now, if we don't train again, if we leave it too long between training sessions, then we get what's called decay, okay? Now this decay is just exactly that, it's a decline in performance, and that will generally bring you back down to your baseline again. So if you miss 2 weeks worth of training because you go on holiday or you're sick, you generally come back and you feel pretty average under the bar, and this is just that period of decay where that adaptation has kind of dropped off, okay? So we need to make sure that we're performing an adequate stimulus generally within a 1 to 5 day cycle, okay? So if you squat on Monday, you can squat again probably on like Thursday or Friday, or even up to probably 7 days. After 7 days, then you probably start to run into a little bit of decay, and then getting onto the bar again will start to feel a little bit harder than it should. So now that we understand what stimulus fatigue is, we've talked about overload principles and the SRA curve, we're going to look now into what deload parameters are. So the recommended time frame of a deload is usually a 1 week period, and it's recommended that that 1 week happens anywhere between 3 to 7 weeks, okay? So usually with most people, we deload around the 4 to 5 week mark, but it really just depends on the intensity of your training. If you train using those overreaching principles, where each week you're doing more, either sets, reps, or weight, that is progressive overload, and that is overreaching, okay? So after generally 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 weeks of that, we will incorporate a deload period of 1 week. If your training is inconsistent, or you're not training to progressively get better and you're just doing the same kind of workout week in, week out, you don't really need to have a deload, okay? So a deload is only there for people that are following this overloading principle and perform any kind of overreaching training. So that deload is there to help them recover so that they can get back on track with this SRA curve, okay? Now the parameters for a deload are usually bringing your training volume down by about 60 to 70%, okay? You also want to bring your training intensity down to somewhere around 80 to 90% of your current training intensity, okay? Now, you don't really need to know those numbers. That's a little bit more detail than you probably need. But that's pretty much how we set up and program your deload periods. Okay, guys, that was quite a little bit of information for you. Just to summarize and recap, deloads are there for people that are performing progressive overload, okay? So weekly, if you're adding sets, adding reps, or adding kilos to the barbell, you will accumulate fatigue, okay? So you're providing a stimulus that will accumulate fatigue over time. And then after, like I say, generally 3, 4, 5, 6 kind of weeks of progressively overloading, you will run into quite a lot of fatigue. So at this point, we want to kind of wash away that level of fatigue. And then once we've had that 1 week break, we've got rid of our fatigue and we can really expose our strength. Okay, so the strength that you have spent 3, 4, 5, and 6 weeks building, once we get rid of that fatigue after a 1 week rest, we can expose that strength and we come back to the gym feeling extremely strong and ready to push hard. Okay, the SRA curve is the perfect example of how we get stronger. But like I say, with that SRA curve, we've just got to make sure that we are performing an adequate amount of recovery. So stimulus, recovery, adaptation. Okay, so SRA. Once we get enough recovery, we will then make good adaptations, and then that, in a nutshell, is how we improve our strength. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, guys. If you've got any questions, feel free to drop us a message, and we'll get back to you and we'll help you out with any questions that you might have.